Before I get into my list of my top 10 favourite albums of the year so far, I just quickly wanted to mention a few other albums that I definitely enjoyed a lot but just didn't quite make it onto my personal list. So there was Steve Lacy's Apollo 21, which was this quite unique mesh of funk, R&B and bedroom pop. Skepta's Ignorance is Bliss was a simple, straightforward grime album but still really enjoyable. There was Jessica Pratt's Quiet Signs, which was this weird kind of quiet folky album. It was still quite moving. Jamila Wood's Legacy was quite a fun modern spin on neo soul. And finally Pivot Gang's You Can't Sit With Us, which was my first introduction to the group, but it was a really fun kind of massive Pussycat album. So now the honourable mentions are out of the way, I'm going to get into my top 10 favourite albums of 2019 so far. So at number 10 I've got Schoolboy Q's latest album Crash Talk. When Num Num Juice dropped, the first single, it got me really hyped for the album, but then Chopsticks dropped, and admittedly I wasn't a fan of it straight away. It took me quite a few listens to get into it. At first listen it was definitely quite a jarring listen for me. What relieved me about Crash Talk was how streamlined of an album it was. It was only 39 minutes, which was almost half the length of Blank Faced LP. That was an album I definitely really enjoyed, but there was just a bit too much filler for me personally. So thematically, Crash Talk doesn't delve into territory we haven't heard Schoolboy Q talk about before. He's a devoted father, he talks about gang banging a lot, but the thing that keeps my attention is his extremely aggressive and animated delivery and flows he has on a large majority of his songs. Songs like Tales and Black Folk specifically contain some of his most socially conscious lyrics to date, and they are slowly becoming personal favourites of mine in his entire discography. The song Dangerous with Kid Cudi is probably the most experimental song Schoolboy Q has in his entire discography so far. It's got these weird, out of tune, dissonant guitar samples that sound like they're being pitched up in real time, and they work quite well on the backdrop of Kid Cudi's slow, crooning voice. Whilst not my favourite album in Schoolboy Q's entire discography, it's definitely a solid addition to his catalogue. Favourite tracks from Crash Talk are Dangerous, Tales, Num Num Juice and Water. At number 9 is Billie Eilish's debut album When We Will Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? Admittedly quite a mouthy title. What impressed me about this album, especially on the first listen, was how it managed to sound subdued and anthemic at the same time. The song Bad Guy, which is probably the biggest hit on the album so far, has Billie Eilish exploring her villainous side over a beat which I feel wouldn't sound out of place on an old Nintendo 64 game. Now, putting aside how much this song has been memed to death on the internet, it's a genuinely catchy and inventive approach to indie pop. In her relatively short career, her vocal performance have definitely improved. Instead of an over breathiness and a lack of control, it's now refined and precise, and it's still quite quiet and subtle, but it works much more effectively. I feel it's quite refreshing that an album that's this massively successful and has this wide commercial appeal is still able to be relatively subversive and unique in its approach to production and performance as well. I didn't immediately love the album. I felt some of the ballads were a bit samey, but when I came to listen to it over and over again, I came to appreciate the subtlety in some of the vocal performance on these more low-key songs. Favourite tracks from this album are Bury a Friend, My Strange Addiction and I Love You. Number 8 is another debut album from London rapper Dave called Psychodrama. On the first song, Psycho, he says, "Talent's in my blood and I don't want to be vain, but if I'm a psycho, then I don't want to be sane." And I feel this is quite a fitting manifesto for the themes of the rest of the album. On this album, Dave clearly shows what sets him apart from his contemporaries, and I feel the aspects that do that are his maturity and his immense social awareness. I'm only 22 myself, and yet he's still younger than me, and that's quite a depressing statistic, to be honest. I feel what also definitely sets him apart is his vulnerability and his willingness to delve deep into mental health issues, and I feel that is an aspect that's severely lacking in British hip-hop. All of this is coupled with extremely witty songwriting, a cold, calculated flow, and extremely clever wordplay as well. And none of these are particularly catered to popular music or the masses either. On the song Stret 'Em, he raps, "My young G's done draws and apes, now I'm cutting through bricks like the 118. And I feel if you don't rely on lyric websites like Rap Genius, you wouldn't get that reference unless you are a young person who's grown up in London. I feel that's where a lot of the merits of this album come. He's not catering to anyone. The album is made by a young Londoner for young Londoners. The album ends on a relatively bittersweet note. He's receiving a voice note from his brother who's in prison. And it provides a message of solidarity between the two, but there's still that awareness of both of them that they're not going to be able to see each other, or his brother's not going to be free for a long while, and that's where that bittersweetness comes in at the end of the album. In terms of British hip-hop, this album is definitely one of the best and most essential that's come out in a long while. Favourite tracks on this album are Psycho, Streatham, Black, Disaster, and Drama. Number 7 is Ariana Grande's Thank You Next. In my previous video, I went into quite a bit of depth on how I came to gravitate towards the album so much and how much of a pleasant surprise it was for me as well. The whole album, I felt, was centered on the theme of dealing with extreme pain and standing strong in the face of adversity, and it culminated in some of the most powerful pop songs of the year to come out so far. The huge title track managed to be moody yet optimistic in equal measure, and I feel it was this complex portrayal of human emotion which allowed her audience to relate to her more than ever on this specific album. There are extreme highs on the album like Seven Rings, and then you've got extreme lows like Ghosting, and it's this emotional and sonic variety that lets this album be such a captivating listen from front to back. If you do want to hear more of my opinion on this album, then definitely check out my last video on this channel. But in short, Thank You Next is definitely the most surprising album of 2019 for me so far. Favourite tracks on this album are Imagine, Needy, Ghosting, Fake Smile, and Thank You Next. Number 6 is Denzel Curry's latest album, Zoo. I wasn't expecting a release from Denzel Curry so soon after Taboo. Naturally, I was extremely excited when I heard the news, considering Taboo was my favourite album of 2018. What I'm really glad that Denzel didn't try to do was replicate the formula for success that Taboo had. That album was thematically dark, it was lyrically dense, it was even poetic at times. But Zoo just throws all of these concepts out the window and goes for something that's straightforward and to the point. Zoo is an album where Denzel Curry proudly and unapologetically professes his love for the place and people that made him the person he is today. Like all of Denzel's previous releases, he seems to be able to inhabit one of a million different flows, and he applies them accordingly depending on the theme of a given song. Some of the instrumentals on the album are downright insane. Birds and Pat are the kind of songs that Denzel Curry is known for, but he's still able to make it sound fresh and new. Although only 29 minutes long, the album feels much longer than it actually is, for all the best possible reasons. The only downside I have to this album is some of the unnecessary skits that I don't really care for, but it doesn't hinder the listening experience too much for me. Aside from those couple of flaws, I feel Zoo, as if Taboo didn't already solidify this, Zoo solidified Denzel as one of the most talented and promising young rappers in the whole genre of hip-hop. I think he's only 24 at the moment. He's already 4 albums deep, and his discography is almost flawless. Favourite tracks from this album are Zoo, Birds, Speedboat, PAT, and Ricky. So halfway through this list, at number 5 is Thom Yorke's latest solo album, Anima. I wasn't expecting a new Thom Yorke album so soon, simply because I knew he was working on the Suspiria soundtrack that dropped last year for such a long time. Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to attend an IMAX preview screening of the short film that accompanied this album, and I even got my hands on a limited edition vinyl. The experience was something that was mind-bending. Visually, it was absolutely amazing. In quite a big contrast to the sounds on the Suspiria soundtrack, Anima reminds me of some of the sounds that appeared on The King of Limbs, especially with its emphasis on electronic dance music and its experimentation with looping sounds as well. As with a lot of Thom Yorke's material, the album deals with themes of paranoia and anxiety, and sometimes it can make for quite a claustrophobic listen, but the instrumental palette definitely contributes to this overall theme of paranoia as well. It's an extremely textured album, and at times it makes you feel that you've been put in this numbing trance, but I feel that's a fitting mood to be put in when you consider that Thom Yorke's described Anima as a distinctly dystopian album. Now, the lyrics in true Thom Yorke fashion are quite cryptic, but on some songs I found myself interpreting them as a critique of the information age, and specifically the social media age that we're in. On the Axe, he sings, "Goddamn machinery, why don't you speak to me? One day I'm gonna take an axe to it," which I feel is him expressing his deep frustration with how we've come to interact in the virtual environment of social media. Dawn Chorus is definitely up there for me as one of the saddest and most haunting songs Thom has made in his career so far. The lyrics seem to describe a person who's at near death, and they're looking back on what they've done in their life, and they've got this sense of deep regret that their life hasn't turned out the way they wanted it to. It's quite a depressing song, even for Thom Yorke standards. So as the lead singer of Radiohead, Thom Yorke is my favourite singer of all time. So I do admit to being quite a bit biased towards this album, but Anima is still a distinctly un-Radiohead album for Thom Yorke. In such a short space of time, I think Anima has become my favourite solo album he's released so far. Favourite tracks from this album are Dawn Chorus, The Axe, and Not the News. So at number 4 is another album I've spoken about on this channel, and that's Little Simz' latest album, Grey Area. There's not much more I can say about how much I love this album that I haven't already said in my previous video. It's distinctly vintage and fresh in equal measure, and it's definitely one of the most refined and precise albums to come out this year so far. The album's not particularly left field or cutting edge, but none of that matters when every aspect is so finely tuned and well crafted, and the album lyrically also lives up to its title. All over the album, Little Simz explores her more morally ambiguous side. She's vulnerable, she's confident, and more so than anything else, she's honest. It's a definite shame that Grey Area didn't receive the commercial success that its quality warranted, but regardless of this, I feel Grey Area has solidified Little Simz' claim to being the best rapper working in the UK right now. Favourite tracks from this album are Offence, Selfish, Venom, 101 FM, and Sherbet Sunset. So going into the top 3, number 3 is the latest collaboration between Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, Bandana. Pinata dropped just under 5 years ago, I think. Naturally, I was really anticipating the release of Bandana because Pinata, over the last half decade now, has slowly become one of my favourite hip-hop albums, period. On Pinata, you had Madlib's classy, timeless instrumentation juxtaposed with Freddie Gibbs' aggressive raps about his gangster lifestyle. Bandana definitely continues that tradition. With fewer guests than Pinata and a significantly shorter runtime, Bandana is still able to pack in just as much quality content as Pinata. In terms of production, over the years we've come to expect a certain level of quality from Madlib, and Bandana definitely doesn't disappoint. The first half of Half Main, Half Cocaine and Palmolive are some of the best beats he's produced ever. Speaking of Palmolive, it contains features from both Killer Mike and Pusha T. Killer Mike comes and provides the hook on the song, but the guest verse from Pusha T is definitely what makes this song extra special. On this song, Pusha T says, It's new stash spots, the AC don't just ventilate. Take over your blocks, young niggas assimilate. We all break bread like going Dutch on a dinner date. That is my favourite set of bars on the entire album, and it's part of what I feel is one of Pusha T's best ever verses. The album provides high quality content consistently track after track, and that is all I could have hoped for in a follow-up to Pinata. It's been well established for quite a large number of years now that Madlib is one of the greatest producers in hip-hop history, and as if Pinata didn't prove this to us already, Bandana definitely solidifies Freddie Gibbs as a top-tier rapper working at the very top of his game right now. Favourite tracks off this album are Half Main, Half Cocaine, Massage Seats, Palm Olive, Fake Names, and Education. So just missing out on number 1 for me. At number 2 is James Blake's latest album, Assume Form. Now over in America, James Blake's probably most well known for his collaborations with a load of A-list artists in the music industry. He's worked with Frank Ocean, Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar, Jay-Z, and so on. However, over here in the UK at least, he's been carving out a very distinct niche for himself for the best part of a decade now. His preceding albums established what was known as the James Blake sound. You had a marriage of electronic ambient beats, his extremely distinct voice, and his keyboard work, which was heavily influenced by the likes of Stevie Wonder. James Blake has also been an extremely inventive collaborator. He's worked with the likes of Brian Eno, RZA, and Bon Iver. And those are a trio of artists you don't normally hear mentioned in the same breath. Now, for the large part, what tied a lot of the themes of his work together was melancholy. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I feel when he got to Assume Form, he had exhausted that aspect of his songwriting. And just from the list of features that we got before the album came out, it signaled a clear new direction that James Blake was going in. On the album we had Moses Sumney, Travis Scott, Metro Boomin, Rosalia, and Andre 3000. What I feel Assume Form is, in its purest form, is a celebration of the vulnerability that comes along with being in love. The song, I think it was the first thing that dropped Mile High. While it's not one of the most poignant songs on the album, especially compared to the title track and the last track, Lullaby for My Insomniac, it's still an inventive exploration of the themes of intimacy. The song for me feels like an exploration of both the emotional aspect of intimacy and the physical aspect of intimacy as well. And of course you have Travis Scott featured on this. At one point him and James Blake harmonize together, which sounds absolutely amazing. Can't Believe the Way We Flow is, in my opinion, the most romantic song that he's written so far. And the song has him ditching his ego and shedding himself of his extreme insular nature, which influenced a lot of his previous music. Now, Where's the Catch, featuring Andre 3000, is the one moment on the album where James starts to question the ability of love to provide happiness and security. And Andre 3000 contributes probably the best rap verse of the year so far. And he speaks on his extreme paranoia about the nature of love and how quickly it will collapse for him. The album's closer, Lullaby for My Insomniac, is framed as a lullaby, but I find it's so entrancing that it doesn't make me want to fall asleep. It just makes me want to listen to it over and over again. Now, I had the pleasure of seeing James Blake perform a lot of this material live a couple of months ago, and it definitely made for one of the most unique live performances I've seen so far. Assume Form for me is definitely the most mature and euphoric and fully realized album of his career so far. Favorite tracks from this album are Almost Everything. Now we get to the number 1 album on my list. I made a 20-minute video solely dedicated to the narrative of this album. I've even got a tattoo in dedication of this album, so it should be no surprise that number 1 is Tyler the Creator's Eagle. Now, I'm not really sure where to begin with this album without sounding like an overly excited fanboy, but it's quite hard to put into words just how much and how quickly this album resonated with me. From a production standpoint alone, this is Tyler's most unique and experimental album to date. He throws conventional hip-hop song structure completely out the window. He draws from jazz and funk and rock and pop and soul and a variety of other genres as well. And he's still able to marry all of these influences together and still make an album that is distinctly Tyler the Creator. The album's concept is so laser focused and streamlined that nothing appears on the album that doesn't need to be there. Even the lyrical content, there aren't that many rap verses, and I feel that's because everything that needs to be said is said and there's no filler whatsoever. It's definitely the most emotionally raw album that he's come out with so far, and in turn it's made for some of his best production and songwriting to date. So I previously mentioned that Ariana Grande had some of the best pop songs of the year, but I feel the song Earthquake is the best pop song of the year so far. I still am utterly confused as to how Playboi Carti rapping over a piano breakdown works so well. I've rarely found myself listening to songs from Igor in complete isolation. I'll try and listen to New Magic Wand or I Think, and then I'll just immediately go straight back to Igor's theme and run the entire album all the way up to Are We Still Friends. Igor is such a unique approach to both breakup albums and concept albums. And even though it draws from a variety of different and clearly distinct influences, there's still nothing else that sounds like it, not just in hip-hop, but in popular music in general. Genre almost becomes totally irrelevant when the themes and concepts that are being portrayed here are so universal, and it makes for such a captivating listen when you have a genuinely sympathetic character to follow through a narrative. The album's cyclical nature is another feature I love about it. I mentioned on my Igor video that if I had this album on a continuous loop, it would still make sense. And I feel that aspect of the album only contributes more to the ultimately tragic nature of the Igor character. It took me a few listens to come to this realization, and I feel the aspect I'm about to mention it's a quality that a lot of my favorite albums share with each other. When I listen to some of my favorite albums and when I listen to Igor, I feel I'm being rewarded by my multiple listens. It's like finding Easter eggs in your favorite films. And I feel this serves the album very well when you consider a lot of the cinematic influences and aesthetics to Tyler's work. I find it hard to think that another album will come out this year that I will enjoy and resonate with so much. Not only is it my favorite album to come out of 2019 so far, it's just come out just over a month ago, and it's already becoming one of my favorite albums to come out this entire decade. My favorite songs on Igor are goddamn all of them. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to let me know in the comments below what are some of your favorite albums of the year so far. Make sure to like, subscribe and dong the bell, and I will see you next time.